Hello and welcome back to another episode of News of the Week, where we want to touch on stuff that is going on in the economy, on things that can actually influence your investing, your money, your cash flow, all those things that are important as a professional investor. So for those of you who actually celebrated it, I hope you had a good Easter holiday. And before and after the holiday, there has been a new topic, I believe, at least for most people, it's a new topic, arising, even though I've been studying it for quite a while. I've always been interested in what happens to currencies. Most of you know that I'm originally from Germany. And so I was actually there when there was still the German mark, and then they transitioned to the euro. And then when I came over to the United States, I became familiar with the dollar. And every time I traveled to other countries outside of the euro or dollar sphere, they had different currencies like the peso in Mexico and so forth and so forth. So the term that I want to address, and that you will probably or have already seen in the news and in the media coming up more and more as news of the week, is called De-Dollarization. And what does it really mean, and where really does it come from, and how is it relevant? And I actually had to make a list of notes here because there's so much going on in that. And a lot of it is, in a sense, geopolitical news, but a lot of it is also related to what has been happening. So the first thing I want to tell you about is the general way we are actually circulating dollars within the global economy. If you really think about it, let's just take the example of you or I or anybody else buying something that is produced and shipped in from China. The way that actually works is we are placing an order, then the company that we're buying from places the order to the company in China. They actually produce the goods, they ship it over in big containers, and then ultimately it comes from a warehouse to us, and we pay for it in dollars. So now the Chinese ultimately get part of those dollars for making the product. But when you would think, okay, well, normally what would they do with the dollars? Well, when they receive the dollars, if they were importing a lot of stuff from us, from the United States, then they would logically use those dollars to pay for the stuff that they buy from us. But there's a huge imbalance. So we buy way more stuff from them than we send to them. So they have a huge surplus of dollars. Now, one thing that they do with that is, you don't just put dollars in a bank vault or something like that, is they buy US Treasuries. And why do they buy US Treasuries? Number one, US Treasuries are considered the safest piece of value that you can have, other than maybe gold or silver or something like that, because the assumption is the country that has the reserve currency, which is the US dollar, will not default. And so which treasury bonds you would rather have? Obviously the ones from the US Treasury, because it's the reserve currency. Now, in a sense, if you think about it, what are treasury bonds? They are basically always issued when the US government says we want to finance something, right? The Treasury Department or the Fed or anybody says we want to finance something, and most of the time it's not financed out of tax payment, it's financed or oftentimes with debt. Well, what is debt? It's basically you issue bonds and you want to find somebody who buys these bonds. Well, the Chinese and Japanese and Belgians and so forth, plenty of countries in the world have always bought these treasury bonds so we could issue more debt. So in a way, our debt has been financed by other people in other countries. Why is this relevant in the context of de-dollarization? You all have heard about the war between Russia and Ukraine. And one of the things, and it has happened in smaller cases before, but not as dramatically as in this case, when the war started between Russia and Ukraine, the EU and the United States decided they needed to sanction and punish Vladimir Putin and Russia. And to do that, they froze all the dollars that the Russians had in any bank accounts in Europe and in the United States. But more on top of that, they also said nobody is allowed to trade with Russia anymore. Nobody is allowed to use the trading systems that have been in place globally. And there are actually agreements and contracts and laws that say you cannot basically kick people out of the global trading system. But when there's a war, oftentimes the laws and the rules and the agreements don't seem to apply anymore. Now, the term that I wrote here on my little notes paper is called the weaponization of the dollar. And what do I mean by that? Weaponization means in this case, the dollar and the fact that everybody who trades, whether we buy something from China or China buys something from the EU or Russia sends or buys something from anywhere in the world, most of these transactions have always been settled in dollars. So if the Russians got euros or dollars, they converted it back to dollars to pay if they bought something, and if they received something, they received the currency. Same thing like the Chinese get the money when we order something from China, and on across the world. Now, one thing is this exchange from whichever currency you get into dollars has a fee associated with it. But the other part that is also relevant in this context is that when the West said, okay, we are weaponizing, and they didn't say it out loud, but in reality, they basically did. They weaponized the dollar by saying only the people that we allow are allowed to trade using the electronic systems. One of the most famous ones is called SWIFT. So when the rest of the countries of the world looked at this, not at the war, but at the way this was handled, it basically said, hold on a minute. Our reserves that we have in our central banks in Argentina and Brazil and Saudi Arabia, somewhere in Africa or somewhere else in South America, anything that we have in dollars could be frozen. And we could just as well, if we do something that those countries that are the most powerful in the world don't like, then they would kick us out of that trading system, of the SWIFT system, of the money exchange system as well. So what can we do against that weaponization? And the solution that is coming up, and that's basically what you hear in the media about de-dollarization, is that countries are wondering, do we really have, every time we buy or sell something, first exchange the money into dollars, or can we do something else? So the first that actually started to trade amongst each other is a group of countries in Asia under the ASEAN group. Then, as you may have heard, about 10 years ago now, China started something called the BRI, or the Belt and Road Initiative, that basically brought countries together who wanted to do infrastructure projects and economic trade with China, and a lot of them are now paying with each other's currencies. Then the next one, and most important one in my view, is called BRICs. That's an abbreviation that stands for the first letters of the countries Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And these 5 countries for the last about 10 years have been working on thinking about how can we come up with a currency that we can trade amongst each other, and how can we make it valuable. And now that they have seen how the dollar has been weaponized, the idea that they came up with was originally to say, okay, we can make a currency digital or electronically, since most of the people in the world, we pay with a credit card or debit card. So they said, okay, we can come up with a digital currency, but people will not value it much if it's not backed up by something. The original idea was, well, let's just back it up with gold. The problem with that is that some countries in this BRICS group have a lot of gold, especially China and Russia have a lot of gold, and the other countries have less gold. And that would be even more true if more countries would want to join this BRICS group. So then they thought about, well, what else has value? And what came to light is that a lot of the countries that are already in BRICS, or those that want to join, like Morocco, Algeria, Egypt, Mexico, I think Argentina, and a few other countries have basically applied to join this BRICS group. Most of them have a lot of natural resources, but they're not all gold. Some have copper, some have lithium, some have manganese and other important rare earths or metals or stuff like that. So the current idea is to say, well, if we come up with a BRICS digital currency, we can back it up in the value with commodities, because most of the member countries have lots of commodities and might just not always be gold. So when you say, well, okay, that's all good and well, but that's a theory, and when is it actually going to come to pass? Well, everybody right now in this part of the world is expecting that the BRICS nations, again, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, when they have their next official meeting in August, will potentially announce the start of this digital currency. But there are also other things. You have maybe heard that China has brokered a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran to have diplomatic relations again. You think, honestly, they would trade in dollars? No, they won't. Then we heard that Brazil and Argentina have realized that they have a lot of trade and they have a common border. So it would be smarter for them to trade and pay for their trades in their currencies, or maybe make a combined currency of the Argentinian money and the Brazilian money, so they don't have to first convert it into dollars back and forth. Then we heard Saudi Arabia is considering to allow China and other countries to buy their oil in their local currency, so in yuan. And then we heard the other day, I think that was last week or just a few days ago, the president of Malaysia said he is no longer bound to have everything paid and converted in the dollar. He is willing to accept any other currency. India is, for example, buying oil and paying it with rupees to Russia. And in the Middle East, more and more countries are thinking, okay, why wouldn't we actually accept other people's currency if we buy from them and sell to them, even if they have to discredit it? So dollarization, this term that came up this week and over the last few weeks, will come up more and more, because one of the things that over the long term, this is not something that's going to happen very quickly, but over the long term, it is very likely that the dollar will potentially no longer be the one and only reserve currency, but that there will be other systems in place, either individually between two countries, or groups like ASEAN or the BRI countries, or the BRICs will actually literally come up with a competing currency. So we might have the dollar as one reserve currency, the BRICs digital money as a second one, and there might be other ones on top of that. So what is the impact to us as investors? As long as we're only investing in the United States, we won't feel much, because everything is calculated in the value of our dollars amongst each other. So when we buy something, sell something, invest in something, collect rent, and so forth, it's all in dollars and there is no exchange. But the big difference will be anything that goes outside. And when you look at how many things the United States or people in the United States and Canada buy from the rest of the world, it has always been dependent that the dollar is the one and only thing, and that other countries basically are bound to use it. Well, if de-dollarization is actually moving forward, that will most likely no longer be the case. And when that change happens, we will have a much harder time to get anybody to buy these treasury bonds. Basically, we bought the goods, we gave them dollars, and they gave the dollars right back to us in treasury bonds. That won't happen anymore, which ultimately in the long term means it will be harder and harder to get any kind of loans or mortgages or credit, both on the government level and below, because we can no longer just, without any end and limit, keep printing dollars if nobody wants to buy them anymore. And they don't buy the dollars directly, they buy the dollars indirectly through the treasury bonds. But if there are many, many alternatives, the likelihood that everybody is basically forced to buy treasuries and treasury bonds is going to go down. So I would like to recommend you may have heard it, now you've heard it here. If you haven't heard it, I would recommend keep an eye out and ask yourself, how much is this de-dollarization moving forward? And as you see it progressing, what you should do is try to diversify the money that you have. Get maybe some euros. If you can, get some yuan, get some gold and silver coins and stuff like that. So not everything you do and have is exclusively in dollars. So that's it for this week. If you see this here on YouTube, please subscribe, like, and give us a comment. If you actually get this in podcast format, leave a comment, download the episode so that we get the benefit and can provide more of these kind of episodes to you in the future. So be well, stay safe, and until next time.